Hello everyone, my name is Borax and we've already covered all of the silver augments in Arena, we've covered all the gold augments, and now it's time for us to rate the prismatic augments. Now 2 of the prismatic augments have been removed, 9 have been added, and now we're up to a total of 52 prismatic augments. Now similarly to my gold augment tier list, we're now in Arena 4.0, and I never made a prismatic augment tier list for the 3.0 version of Arena, so we'll be doing that in this video as well at the end, moving a few of the prismatic augments that have been either buffed, or the ones that my opinion just simply have changed on. Now the 2 augments that have been completely removed are Thieves' Gloves, which used to be an augment that gave you random items between the rounds, as well as buffing all the stats of the items. And while it was really fun for me, one of my favorite augments, I did put in the kind of troll tier because it was a pretty troll augment in general. You oftentimes just got really bad items for the rounds, and just in general, Thieves' Gloves was a really interesting augment, but pretty lackluster at the end of the day. Now, the other augment that has been removed is Plaguebearer, but it's pretty similar to the augment Dreadbringer that is replacing it. Now, Plaguebearer and Thieves' Gloves are the only augments that have been removed, but DoomSayer I'm also going to add to this list, because all the curse augments are just simply different as they revamped the curse system. Now that we've talked about the removed augments, we can go straight into the new augments, and the first one we have is, well, technically Augment 405, and it actually gives you something where it gives you 5% increased damage per hat that you are wearing. And this augment can only be granted when the parasitic mutation or symbiotic mutation augment has attempted to copy itself. I actually got one of these augments that don't really exist in the game, and that one gave me 2 hats, but I'm just not gonna rate this one simply because you literally cannot pick it, so I'm only going to rate the augments that you can pick. Also get the Prismatic Augment Null out of the way because it's pretty much the same as Augment 405, but this one literally does nothing. Now we can get into the real new augments, and the first one we have is Clown College, which is going to be the longest read, so I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. And what this does is it replaces your summoner spell Flee with Shaco's Deceive ability, and now you get an extra blink, so in a way you have Flash and this Deceive ability, which is really nice. And Deceive also comes with some damage. It'll allow your next basic attack to deal 100 plus 150% bonus AD plus 55% AP physical damage, and because Clown College also always gives you Shaco passive, where your basic attacks on hit now deal extra damage when hitting an enemy from behind, which is a nice added bonus. And then finally you have this passive effect, where on death, you cause an explosion near you, which deals 25% of target's maximum health through damage to enemies, and it fears them for 1 second, which is really nice. Now, Clown College sounds absolutely crazy, but it definitely belongs in the consistently good category, and the way I like to think of Clown College is by thinking of other augments that we've already talked about before. If you think about it, Clown College is kind of like a gold augment such as Flashy, or any augment that gives you more flashes, but not only does it give you a blink, it also gives you a vanish effect with the blink, which is really, really nice. And finally gives you an empowered dive bomber effect, where on death you yourself will deal target maximum health damage, but it also will fear the enemies, so it's just better in general. So Clown College is kind of a bunch of these other augments all rolled into one, and I do think it is just consistently good. You also gain on top of that just this extra damage if you're backstabbing people, which will happen more often than you think, especially if people are like trying to kite you. If they're turned around, then you will be applying this damage. You also get the damage from blinking, which is rather nice. One of the best ways I see Clown College actually being used, though, is by like engaged champions, because you can jump in really early on and people don't really expect you coming, and then you show out of nowhere, use all your CC abilities, hopefully your teammate can follow up, you can just absolutely wipe them. And even if like you trade 1 for 1, maybe you get the explosion, you fear the enemies, you're doing a bunch of damage, so it's a nice little wombo combo, especially for those engaged champions. And it's still good on other champions I want to go in, like assassins or bruisers, because you do have extra damage that are coming from your backstab and all of this. The only reason why I'm not going to put it in any of the higher tiers is because prismatic augments in general are pretty crazy. So even though this augment itself is like a bunch of other augments that already exist, I just don't think it has the same high highs that some other prismatic augments might have. The next augment we'll talk about is DoomSayer. And what this one does is that your ability hits against enemy champions generate 2 curse stacks and deal bonus true damage equal to the number of them you have generated in the current round. And like all the other curse augments, you can get up to 30 curse stacks per round. So if you get all the curse stacks, your abilities will then be doing 60 bonus true damage, which isn't that impressive. But the best thing about this is that you will be permanently gaining adaptive force equal to 100% of all curse stacks generated. So every round you could be getting up to 30 adaptive force, which is rather nice, and this can scale rather quickly. And for all these reasons, I'm going to put it in the OP or useless tier. If you're constantly able to get all of your stacks of DoomSayer in the early game, then in the late game, you're just going to have a bunch of extra adaptive force, which is really, really nice. That being said, it's kind of similar to Phenomenal Evil in a way, but the advantage of DoomSayer is you can take it on AD champions as well. But I think that's more a sign of just how strong Phenomenal Evil can potentially be than a sign that DoomSayer might actually be weak. Now, the problems with DoomSayer is that in the late game, if you just have so much damage, you might not get that many stacks because you'll just win the fight too quickly. Or if you're getting absolutely run down, then you won't get any stacks because you just don't have time to be hitting champions with those abilities. So that's why it belongs to the OP or useless tier, because either you're just going to have a bunch of adaptive force, or you're going to have absolutely nothing and be down a Prismatic Augment. The next augment we're going to talk about is the other Prismatic Curse augment, which is Dreadbringer, and this one, for every second that you're within 500 units of an enemy champion, you generate 1 curse stack, and it deals bonus true damage equal to the number of them you have generated in the current round within that area. And like all of the curse augments, you can generate up to 30 curse stacks, so that means if you get maximum stacks, you will be doing a very impressive 30 bonus true damage each second. Yep, that is very unimpressive, and I definitely think this will get a nerf at some point. That being said, you then do gain bonus health equal to 225% of all curse stacks generated. So let's say you played 10 rounds, you got the 30 curse every single round. That means you would have 300 curse overall, and that would lead to a very impressive bonus health of 675 from your Prismatic Augment. Yeah, this is going to the bottom of kind of troll. I just think, simply put, the numbers on Dreadbringer are terrible right now. I don't really know why. My theory is they're afraid that Dreadbringer could have been too OP if any of the numbers are tweaked. It's kind of hard. I think the best thing they can do is just maybe make the bonus true damage a little bit higher. Maybe make it so it's not just the curse that you've generated in this current round, because then the damage is always going to be 30, which just sucks. And then I also think they just need to increase the percent of health you get from the curse stacks. Again, this is a problem for Riot to deal with. I 100% expect Dreadbringer to receive some buffs soon. Then I could easily see it skyrocketing up on this list depending on how many buffs it gets. But right now, this augment is just absolutely terrible. And I really want it to be good because I love playing tanks and I love the idea of scaling to have this insane amount of health. But right now, awful augment, in my opinion. The next new augment we have is actually right below it, and it's Dual Wield, which increases your total attack speed by 100%. And now your attacks deal 65% damage, and your on-hit effects deal 50% damage. And it's a pretty simple prismatic, and I'm going to put it in the useful but kind of weak tier. My problem with Dual Wield is that sometimes you just won't be able to pump out a bunch of attacks at once because there's CC in the game, there's damage in the game, you have to kite at certain moments. So let's say you have randomly 5 attack speed, doesn't mean you're going to be able to attack. Oftentimes you're just getting jumped on, you just have to fight for your life, and having a bunch of attack speed might not help you in those cases because, like I was saying, if you get CC'd, you're not going to be able to attack. It also sucks because, like, let's say you only get a couple autos off. Those autos in general are just doing less damage. It's one of the few prismatics that has a straight up downside where your attacks are now dealing 65% damage, your on hits are now dealing 50% damage. So in my opinion, oftentimes you'd rather just be doing like a few really impactful autos, because if you're able to like free hit in general, then as a carry, you're most likely going to win the round anyways. The only reason I'm not going to put it any lower, I mean, it is pretty low on this Prismatic tier list, is because all Prismatics do have usually certain situations where they can absolutely pop off. That's something that's really important to remember. And there could be some use cases where I see Dual Wield being absolutely amazing. I just think that oftentimes you'll be actually kind of disappointed with Dual Wield when you take it. I can imagine it being kind of nuts on someone like Olaf because he's like CC immune, so him having a bunch of attack speed could be really interesting. But then if you do end up somehow getting kited anyways, then, or you just get like blown up by something else, by like one of the better augments, there's just like so much damage, that again, it could be a bit lackluster. So if you're able to free hit pretty consistently, dual wield could be really, really good. But if you don't have that as one of your conditions, then I don't really like this augment. Next up, we have Fan the Hammer, where your next basic attack in each cardinal direction within 750 range will additionally on attack fire 5 bolts at the target that each deal 10 to 52.5 plus 50% bonus AD, but it's going to be a total of 75% bonus AD plus this flat amount. And the nice thing is that the bolt's damage will be increased by the distance traveled, and each bolt can also critically strike, and the bolts apply on-hit effects at 20% effectiveness. So with all 5 bolts, you're going to get 100% effectiveness on one of your autos. And like I was talking about with dual wield, I think that Fan the Hammer is just simply better because it's not conditional where you need to be autoing a bunch. It just really empowers certain autos that you get. I'm going to put this in the can be strong but very niche tier. My problem with Fan the Hammer is that you only get it occasionally. I don't know what the cooldown on it is. Okay, I do see it is 5-second cooldown per direction, so it is pretty low. I just think that, again, similarly to all of the like on-hit augments, you might just end up getting blown up where you don't get too many procs of Fan the Hammer. I think it could be really OP on champions that like just hit in all directions really fast, like Belveth, Urgot could be something that's interesting because you're already playing around that. So definitely can be strong in the right scenarios, but at the same time, it's not something that scares me too much right now. It is definitely nice. It empowers one of your autos really well, but it doesn't wow me enough to move it any higher. Now we have Gamba Anvil, which kind of feels like the successor of Thieves' Gloves, but it's definitely a better execution. And what this does is that it grants you 1,000 gold, and additionally, all of your anvils will be cheaper. So your Prismatic Anvils will go from 4,000 gold to 3,000 gold, and your basic anvils will go from 2,000 gold to, I believe, 1,500 gold. And then your stat bonus anvils will also be reduced to 650. This augment is honestly just the perfect definition of useful, but kind of weak. It's a good augment. I do enjoy taking it, but it just doesn't have the same wow factor as, again, a lot of other Prismatic Augments, because if Prismatic Augments don't give you the wow factor, that probably means they're not really the best. This could be really good if you're addicted to the stat bonus anvil strat, because you could buy even more, because they're even cheaper. But usually I take it and just mainly focus my game around having a bunch of prismatic items. So if you're a champion that really wants a bunch of different prismatic items, then Gamba Anvil is a great choice for you. But I just think in most cases you might be able to get those prismatic items anyways without having to take Gamba Anvil. So you're giving up another prismatic in order to secure being able to use more prismatic items in general. It's definitely always going to be useful, but not my favorite and not that OP. Speaking of getting more prismatic anvils, we have Prismatic Egg, where scoring a champion takedown generates a stack, and once per champion per round, you gain a free prismatic item anvil. So the way that this would work is that you get 2 takedowns one round, or 3 if the enemy champion gets revived, and the next round you have to get 2 again, or 2 in the first, 3 in the next. So you could, in theory, get a prismatic anvil every 2 rounds. The problem is you're just simply down a prismatic augment the entire time, so it might be harder for you to get those prismatic anvils. For this reason, I'm going to put this definitely in the kind of troll tier. You're really relying on your teammate to be able to pretty much 2v1. And thankfully, because most likely with Prismatic Egg, you're taking it when it is a prismatic round. And there are some prismatic augments which might allow your teammate to actually 2v1, or if they're just a really strong champion anyways. And then Prismatic Egg could be good in those cases, or maybe the enemy champions are trolling, and then you can scale with Prismatic Egg. But that all being said, it just really sucks not having a Prismatic Anvil at all. So honestly, I'm going to put it lower. Gonna end up putting it right now above Dreadbringer. It is probably just not a good augment in general. It's kind of relying on the fact that either your champion is really busted or your teammate's champion is really busted, especially with the augment they got. And in those cases, you're already in a good spot, and you could be in even a better spot if you just took an augment that you could use well. So yeah, you might just end up throwing your entire game because you want to super duper high roll your game which I do respect. I do like super duper high rolling, but definitely a huge risk and will usually lead to not great rewards. Next up, we have stats on stats, and upon selecting this augment, you gain 4 stat bonus anvils for free. This one, the pure definition of useful, but kind of weak. I've already talked about the stat anvil augments in the gold augment and the silver augment tier list, but I definitely think this one is the worst because instead of giving up a gold augment or a silver augment, you're now giving up a prismatic augment, and are 4 stat bonus shards really gonna make up for that? Because oftentimes the prismatic augments really enhance your champion or gives them like something that they just normally wouldn't have to make them really strong. So kind of similarly to Prismatic Egg, stats on stats on stats can be good if your champion itself is already good. It's definitely always going to be useful because stats are always useful, but it's definitely kind of weak in the context of just looking at all other prismatic augments that are out here. You can also just simply compare it to Gamba Anvil, because all stats and stats and stats does is give you 4. So if you take Gamba Anvil, you could, in theory, with 1,000 gold, already buy one and almost another stat anvil because they're cheaper by 650. And then throughout the game, you can actually probably end up buying more stat bonus anvils with Gamba Anvil than if you took stats on stats. Sure, it would be weaker in the early game because you immediately get the shards from that. So unless you get lucky with stats on stats, you get like the Fortune Charm, which gives you 500 gold per round, or like a bunch of prismatic shards, then just in general, I think Gamba Anvil is already going to be better for you if you're really like stat bonus shards. Take that, but if you're super duper addicted, then take stats on stats on stats. The final new augment we have is Transmute Chaos, which is your reward for playing a bunch of games of Arena. You can finally unlock Transmute Chaos, and then you get what I consider to be the worst prismatic augment in the entire game right now. The only reason why it is actually lower than Dreadbringer is because I think Dreadbringer will be receiving buffs pretty shortly, so just this is kind of anticipation, putting it below that. Transmute Chaos gives you 2 random gold augments, and on average, most prismatic augments are a lot better than gold augments, and the fact that you just get random ones really sucks. Thankfully, they did get rid of some of the terrible gold augments like Cannon Fodder or Dive Bomber. Those are now silver augments, so you can't hit those. But, like, for instance, you could be playing an AD champion and just get Phenomenal Evil, and then you're screwed. Well, actually, I don't think it can give you an augment that you can't use, but it could give you it if you just have, like, one really random AP scaling. Yeah, there's just, like, so many instances of gold augments where I would just be like, wow, this is definitely not better than prismatic augments. So I would only take Transmute Chaos if I really didn't want to roll, didn't have any more rolls, and the other 2 options I have are just so terrible that I pray that when I click Transmute Chaos, RNG gives me 2 good gold augments for my specific character in this specific case. But that's just something I think wouldn't be that amazing, and it's usually going to be better just to secure yourself a very nice prismatic augment. Now that we've talked about all of the new prismatic augments, I'm going to go back and take a look at my old tier list and move some things around based on my new ideas about the game. Now again, I will emphasize this. Remember, prismatic augments are good, so just because that prismatic augment is down here or anything doesn't mean that there's some games where it won't be absolutely amazing. I mean, I hope it will be because it is a prismatic augment. It would be really sad if any of these were just absolutely terrible. Dreadbringer. So just keep that in mind. If something's low, doesn't mean that it's always going to be terrible. I just think that on average, when you compare it to the other prismatic augments, I do think it is a bit weaker. Also, if there's any augments that I don't end up talking about, make sure to check out my old prismatic augment tier list. It's time-stamped for you, so you can immediately jump to the augment you want to see me talk about, and you can hear my thoughts on that one. Or if there's any that you think my opinion might have changed that I just kind of forgot about, or you just have any questions about any of the augments or anything, make sure to ask in the comments below. But without further ado, let's go into re-ranking this. And the first augment that we're going to change is True Shot Prodigy, which is going to go down from OP or useless all the way to kinda troll. And the problem with True Shot Prodigy is that it does deal a very impressive amount of damage, but you have to hit a target from over 700 units away. So if the enemies just jump on you, engage on you, close the distance somehow, then you're just simply down a prismatic augment throughout the entire game, which really sucks. The 700 units is quite a lot of distance. And usually what happens is people are just constantly on top of you. So True Shot Prodigy, the way it works is usually you'll be able to get like 1 or 2 procs in the early game, maybe 3 or 4 if you're playing like something like Zyra, I think is one of the best True Shot Prodigy users. Like Heimerdinger is another one, because you just like put out all of your turrets and then you just hide really far away and hope that you just constantly proc True Shot Prodigy. Another thing that sucks about it is that it can be dodged, so you're like casting an Ezreal ult from very far away, and if the enemies are paying attention, they'll just dodge it. Like, how often are you playing normal League of Legends and you're getting hit constantly by Ezreal ults? It's like, it's not the hardest thing to dodge in the world. So for all these reasons, I do think it is kind of troll. It's not at the very bottom because it does deal damage, which is nice, but sometimes it just won't do anything, which really sucks for a Prismatic Augment. The next augment we're going to be moving down is also actually coming from OP or useless and is also going to kind of troll, and that is Nesting Doll, because when I originally ranked it, there wasn't any revives in Arena, so that was a very big change. And now what Nesting Doll does is that you revive yourself slowly, but that's not really that amazing because the enemies can just camp you and kill you again. Before, Nesting Doll just like immediately brought you back, I believe, and instead it just takes so long to get yourself back with Nesting Doll. It looks like you can be revived with the help of your ally, and yeah, when you respawn, you have this reduced max health and size, and it happens over and over again. It also says this effect can only activate while your ally is alive and is canceled immediately if they die while you are in the down state, so you don't get a Prismatic Augment at all if your teammate dies first, it looks like. Yeah, so it's even worse than I thought. You just don't get anything if your teammate is the one who dies first. So if you see an enemy team with Nesting Doll, make sure you kill their teammate first, and then you don't have to worry about somebody's Prismatic Augment. So yeah, when there wasn't any revives, then Nesting Doll was like the only way you could come back before you just die, and that was it. And Nesting Doll was nice that you were able to come back, keep fighting. So in that case, it was good. I also don't think it relied on your teammate being alive. So the fact that that's in the game is the reason why I actually just now realize how terrible Nesting Doll is, because sometimes I see people take it and it just doesn't do anything. So yeah, it doesn't do any extra damage, just gives you a revive, but now that there's already a revive in the game, it's kind of superfluous. The next augment that's getting bumped down, which I can imagine is a fan favorite, is sadly Laser Eyes. It's just not enough damage, and it's kind of awkward the way you have to use it. You have to be like staring at the enemies, so if you're like running away, Laser Eyes doesn't end up doing anything. The damage just isn't enough, especially in the later stages of the game, to really warrant being taken compared to any of the other augments. It looks really cool. It's a funny concept, but very rarely in any stage after like 4 or 3 do I see somebody take Laser Eyes and I'm like, oh no, they have Laser Eyes. It's just kind of whatever when it comes to the damage. Now, the new addition to useful but kind of weak is going to be Spirit Link, and what Spirit Link does is that it redirects 15% of the damage dealt to your ally to you, and you heal yourself equal to 50% of the healing they receive. Spirit Link before was quite strong because the meta really was support plus carry, especially in Arena 3.0, and now that meta in general is just weaker because all the on-hit champions have been nerfed. There's the changes to the Arena stat adjustments, where there's no more like on-hit damage for every champion. There's just a lot of conditions where that like enchanter plus carry strategy isn't as good, where I think Spirit Link just isn't as impressive anymore. If you really, really want Spirit Link, then you can also just build Knight's Vow, and that item isn't super duper strong in Arena. So again, Spirit Link, while definitely a better version of Knight's Vow, kind of meh. In can be strong but very niche, we'll be bumping up Fey Magic, and what this does is that when you damage enemies with your ultimate ability, you polymorph them, which is Lulu's W, and that makes them slower, and it makes them be disarmed, so they can't cast any abilities, and they can't auto-attack you. And honestly, this is pretty good. Before, I rated it pretty low because it just felt, in my mind, kind of lackluster. The more I play around Fey Magic, the more I play with Fey Magic, there are some use cases where it can be really annoying. Like a Nivea ult is really good with Fey Magic because you're like keeping them in for a longer time and they can't really respond with that. Also, something like Swain ult is really good because you're like just keeping them stuck in there, and you will eventually get more and more procs of Fey Magic. So in those cases, it can be really good. In a way, I'm not going to really talk too much about Feel the Burn, but you can think of it as a better version of Feel the Burn because you're going to usually do that in order to exhaust enemies to reduce their damage. But Fey Magic, while more conditional, is just so much better because you're fully CCing them for 2 seconds, which is a fair amount of time. And yeah, it is definitely something that can be kind of nice. It's just not going higher because it doesn't do any damage still. So if you're not able to finish them off or survive because of Fey Magic, then it still sucks. The other addition to this category is actually getting a really big downgrade, and that's Ultimate Revolution. It is a nice augment. I like taking it, but at the same time, just not every single champion wants to use their ultimates twice. I feel like people in general are just a little bit more tanky. It's cool, like, having 2 Annie ults, having 2 Amumu ults, having 2 Kennen ults, all of this. But even like in the Kennen example, it's like you're already casting your ult once, and then you have to wait and then do it again. Sometimes you'd rather just finish them off with 1 ult and call it a day. It is definitely a very strong Prismatic Augment, which is why it's going in the can be strong, but very niche tier, because, and the only times you would take Ultimate Revolution is that your ultimate is just so powerful that it would be better to have it twice than having any of these other augments. In the OP early to mid game, meh late game category, we're going to have Spell Wake, and this augment is nice. You do deal good damage. What it does is that when you hit in a champion with an ability, it sends a trail from you to the location. Very similar to Earthwake, except instead of it being your dash moves, it's your spells. The problem with Spell Wake is the damage itself isn't too crazy. You don't get that many procs from it often, and if you do get a bunch of procs from it, then it is really good. But yeah, just in general, the damage kind of falls off from Spell Wake. Usually you'll just want other better augments out there, which is why it's getting the downgrade. In the consistently good tier, we're going to be moving up Eureka, and what this does is it gives you ability haste equal to 30% AP. Short, simple, very strong, because you can just very easily get a bunch of AP from oftentimes other augments, or just throughout the game you're building a lot of items that give you AP. And compared to something like Accelerating Sorcery, where you have to cast a bunch and it takes a while to ramp up, Eureka, you just get it immediately, and if you're getting into that like 1000 AP range, that's giving you 300 ability haste, and that does stack from your other ability haste, so it's very easy to get to like 400 ability haste with Eureka. So you're pretty much playing Earth thanks to this augment more consistently actually than Accelerating Sorcery, which is why I'm placing it higher. Accelerating Sorcery is way better in the early game because you have more time usually to scale up as damage is lower, but Eureka easily outpaces Accelerating Sorcery in the late game. In OP or useless, we'll be bumping down Chain Lightning. And the only reason why it's getting a downgrade is because it's just not game defining in the cases where the enemies are not next to each other. If the enemies are not next to each other, your Chain Lightning does absolutely nothing. So if there is some kind of condition where the enemies are able to play apart from each other, then you're just down a Prismatic Augment, which sucks. Or if you're able to pick off one person and then you need all of your strength to then also get the other person, you'll be down an augment as Chain Lightning won't do anything because you need 2 people to be hitting. That being said, if they are next to each other, Chain Lightning is absolutely bonkers, can immediately wipe 2 people on a team, so it's definitely going to belong in the OP tier, because there are some rounds you will just simply lose because of Chain Lightning, so it definitely belongs in this tier. Now don't you worry, sports fans, we are getting some more game-defining Prismatic Augments, and the first will be Quest Wooglet's Witch Cap, which gives you at the beginning of the game a needlessly large rod, which is just 120 AP, which is pretty ridiculous in the early game, and so even though you might have a weaker Prismatic Augment, it isn't actually that weak in the early game. Then you have to build a Rabadon's Death Cap and a Zonya's Hourglass, and you're rewarded with a Wooglet's Witch Cap, which is a really strong item as it combines the 2 items, and it combines your needlessly large rod. So you end up being able to have 2 items in 1 item slot, which is really, really underrated, and maybe one of the main reasons it's in game defining, especially because now that we have like the stage select things, we can vote on the different champions to modify the game. There's just more opportunities to get gold, I feel, or like champions that just give you better things. So having that extra item slot just seems to matter more in Arena 4.0. And of course, don't forget that Wooglet's Witch Cap's Zonya's is better than normal Zonya's. I believe it just has a way shorter cooldown. Yeah, it has a 20-second cooldown compared to 120 seconds, so that's ridiculous. And Of course, it gives you, it says 50% ability power. I think that's true. Yeah, instead of giving you the normal 30% ability power. Okay, that's actually wrong. Rabadon's Death Cap in Arena gives you less than that. Okay, I'm not 100% sure how much AP Wield Switch Cap gives you. Maybe it's only 30%. Maybe it is the 50%. But yeah, this item will easily let you get to 1,000 AP. If you have like other AP scaling from augments, then this one is also just absolutely incredible. Great augment for AP champions in almost every single case. Now, one of the cases that you might not want to take Wooglets is that you would rather take Jeweled Gauntlet, which definitely belongs in the game-defining tier. In earlier versions of Arena, the game itself was just shorter because there was only 4 teams and it felt like you could get eliminated faster. But now that the game itself just feels like longer, you don't have the downside of sometimes just not having a Prismatic Augment, because you do need to build crit in order to utilize Jeweled Gauntlet. But when you do, and when you do apply those critical strikes on your abilities, either as an AP champion or an AD champion, Jeweled Gauntlet will just absolutely one-shot some people. It is definitely by far the best high roll augment, I will say, where you can just like instantly one-shot a team because of Jeweled Gauntlet. The only reason I'm keeping Wisdom of Ages higher than it, even though it could be controversial, is because I think it's just more consistently good. Like, you do reach level 6 before everybody else, which is a really nice power spike. And in the late game, while Jeweled Gauntlet, yeah, you are doing a bunch of damage. I think Wisdom of Ages just gives you so many like stat benefits. There's so many things that scale with your level. So being able to reach these really high, ridiculous levels still makes me think Wisdom of Ages is king. But man, Jeweled Gauntlet sometimes does make me think it does belong in the top spot. It's just also that because it is a bit weaker in like round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, that then Wisdom of Ages still might be on top. So definitely something to consider. I'll also quickly add that I thought about maybe lowering Scopious weapons, but when you do need Scopious weapons, there's just oftentimes not an augment that is better. If you're having troubles like hitting the enemy champions, then Scopious weapons is just simply going to be your best option. It can suck if like the enemy has a bunch of dive, again, like Malphite or other assassins, but if you're able to get some peel, then Scopious weapons is just really, really strong, and it's really good, especially on melee champions, to prevent them from getting kited, and can really just help you win a game because you have this one simple Prismatic Augment. So there we have it. We've now completed the Prismatic Augment tier list, and that means we've completed the tier list for all of the augments. Once again, if you have any questions about any augments or think I might have missed something, have your own comments, feel free to leave them below, as I'll be very interested in seeing that. And besides that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to leave it a like if you enjoyed the video. And next, I will be finally working and completing making tier lists for the actual champions in Arena, as I know that's definitely something people want to see. And I definitely have a lot of thoughts on it, as I have in the past played every single champion in Arena, so I do have pretty good ideas on how strong they are. So I'll be excited to complete that and share that with you guys, and if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe. Thank you guys once again, and best of luck on your Arena adventures.